At 3:10 in the morning on the 25th of December, 2025, behind the Russian defensive line in eastern Ukraine, on infrared screens, roughly 80 to 120 Ukrainian drones light up almost simultaneously, skimming low over tree lines and drainage ditches, holding steady altitude, constant speed, none breaking rhythm. Russian radar remains silent and air defenses do not fire. A clean corridor opens, smoothly, suspiciously smooth. In the Ukrainian control room, the signal is clean, latency low, everything is according to plan with unsettling ease. But a few kilometers away, beyond a cluster of villages, a Russian electronic warfare vehicle has just raised its antennas and come to a halt. No emissions, just waiting. One more beat and the sky will change hands. Throughout the day on the 24th of December, UAV pulses probed for reactions. By the night of the 24th into the 25th, Ukraine pushes the scale to saturation. This strike is not aimed at a tank or a trench line. It targets the rhythm of Russia's rear, fuel depots forced to go dark at the last hour, transfer yards where trucks must appear on schedule. Ukraine chooses swarms because they are cheap, fast, and able to penetrate deep without dragging an entire air wing behind them. They gamble that quantity, and speed will break air defense reflexes. Too many targets, orders always arriving late. The swarm is layered, but not for show. The low layer hugs the terrain, clinging to tree lines like the edge of shadow. The decoy layer flies off beat, high enough to force the enemy to look up and switch on radar. Above, there are only one or two bridges, signals that keep the whole swarm under command. If the bridge breaks, the swarm does not explode. It dissolves, falling into separate logics. Russia understands this. They do not need to shoot much. They only need to cut the right string. Not long after 3:10, the swarm reaches the forward line and passes through in a way that makes people start believing the clean corridor is real. Nearly 100 drones slip into the rear of Russian defenses at altitudes between 60 and 120 meters, hugging tree lines and drainage ditches as if the flight path had been pre-drawn. Speed holds steady at around 100 kilometers per hour. None surge ahead, none fall behind. On Russian ground radar, the return is thin and fragmented, enough to know something is there, not yet solid enough to lock on immediately. On the edge of the area, a Pantsir S-1 system briefly activates its radar and opens fire on the higher-flying decoy group. A few drones fall, and that is a low price to pay for what Ukraine needs most. Space behind the line. The main formation does not change rhythm, gliding through the newly opened corridor and vanishing from engagement range. Radar switches off again, the sky returning to silence as if no one had just crossed it. When more than two-thirds of the formation has slipped past the initial surveillance layer, drone feeds begin to clearly reveal the rear area. In the Ukrainian control room, operator tempo increases, faster, tighter, and a decision is made. Push a second wave, exploit the open window. On the Russian side, silence holds. Electro-optical stations track targets only within their visual frames, while one electronic warfare vehicle finishes erecting its antennas along the main flight axis. From Ukraine's perspective, everything looks favorable, but battlefields rarely close with an explosion. Sometimes they simply wait for the precise moment when people believe they are already through. When the swarm has pushed deep enough into the dawn window of the 25th of December, 2025 for the clean corridor, the rhythm begins to slip in the most dangerous way. No warning explosions, no tracer lines cutting across the sky. Just the signal suddenly going soft, and the entire control room feeling that something has slipped out of their hands. Feeds from several drones twitch slightly, frames breaking into short pulses, latency stepping up another notch. On the digital map, some icons drift off their waypoint lines and then struggle to pull themselves back, off by a few dozen meters, as if the guidance system is clinging to the flight path with its last strength. There is no major shock. Only one very clear sensation. The link is no longer as solid as it was minutes ago, And in an operation that lives on links, that is the worst sign of all. Then the desynchronization spreads by clusters, fast and ruthless. A forward group of roughly 5 to 7 drones begins to fly no longer as one. Some climb past 120 meters, as if panicking in search of a signal. Some drop down to treetop level at only 40 to 50 meters. Some hold heading but slow by a full beat, falling 8 to 10 seconds behind the formation. From a distance, the cluster looks like a convoy that has just lost its lead vehicle, still charging forward, but discipline cracked, each unit following its own reflex. On Ukrainian control screens, alerts thicken into a layer of psychological noise, packets dropping, commands arriving late, feedback lagging further. And the terrifying part is that the drones keep flying, but command authority is slowly sliding off the fingertips. That is when Russia pulls the lever. A mobile electronic warfare cluster of the Borysoglebsk 2/GTEL type, positioned behind the defensive line, switches on emissions once the swarm has penetrated deep into the main flight axis at a distance of roughly 10 to 15 kilometers. It does not need to blanket the entire sky. It erects a narrow but dense jamming pocket, placed precisely where the formation compresses after crossing the line. Inside that zone, positioning begins to drift in small beats, and control links break intermittently by clusters rather than individual units. The drones do not fall immediately in the sense of being shot down. They lose something more critical. Synchronization, the thing that turns hundreds of separate objects into a single spear. From here, the sky's rhythm changes very fast. The leading drones fly like drunks, right direction, wrong timing. Commands one step late, responses another step slower. Then, when an overhead relay flickers, the entire lower portion of the formation loses command almost simultaneously, like someone switching off the lights in a tunnel. In just 3 to 4 minutes, more than 80 drones transition from in flight to link lost, and that moment is the moment the operation is snapped mid-air. Dozens of icons change color in waves, and Ukraine understands that it no longer controls the swarm. It can only watch it come apart. Ukraine reacts on instinct, boosting transmission power, cycling channels, trying to raise additional relays to hold the swarm together. But each time the signal grows stronger, the picture on the Russian side sharpens. Electro-optical stations and short-range radars keep each cluster of drones in frame, in no hurry to fire, simply waiting for the formation to expose itself while trying to save itself. The corridor, once marked SAF, turns into a strip of suspended, disordered targets, and this is the real breaking point. The swarm is not brought down by firepower. It is broken from the inside, like a nervous system being cut, and the entire body losing coordination in the exact few minutes that decide everything. Once the jamming pocket has shattered synchronization, the sky behind the Russian line is no longer a swarm with intent. It turns into a stretched strip of scattered targets along the flight axis, more than 80 drones hanging low, around 40 to 120 meters, slowing down, hesitating, no longer daring to change rhythm because every change now only exposes them more clearly. Those still trying to hold their waypoints fly like drunks, right direction, wrong timing, and that very mistiming turns them into exactly what short-range air defense is built to deal with: low-flying targets, readable flight paths, and most importantly, no longer reacting as a group. On the edge of the corridor, Pantsir S1 switches its radar back on and shifts into a decisive firing rhythm. No more probing shots, no more waiting. The twin 2x30mm cannons begin to sweep the targets, bunching up, dragging a low band of fire across the flight axis, while short-range missiles deal with those trying to climb in search of restored links. Deeper in, Tor M2 plays the role of the door closer, catching the drones still trying to push toward the logistics truck parks and the field fuel depots just revealed on the feeds. On the ground, layers of 23 to 30mm anti-aircraft guns expand into a blade along the corridor, exploiting the fact that the drones no longer maneuver finely as a formation. Each time a cluster loses rhythm, the firing rhythm becomes steadier. Every few dozen seconds, a group falls in bursts, not because saturation has been broken, but because saturation has turned into density, and density makes everything easier to hit. In the Ukrainian control room, the final reflex triggers by instinct. Transmission power is pushed up, control channels are switched constantly, overhead relays are lifted higher in an attempt to reconnect the collapsing bridge. But in an operation that lives on links, transmitting harder in desperation does exactly one thing. It turns on the lights. Russia does not need to decode content. It only needs to catch emission bearings, measure intensity, and box in where the control point and relay point are struggling to keep the swarm listening. And once they have boxed that in, the counterstrike does not need to hit the sky first. It hits what is keeping the sky under command. When the densest emission node is fixed at the edge of the battle line, a salvo of 122mm rockets, BM-21T, Tornado G, pours down in short rhythm. It does not need to hit each vehicle precisely. It only needs to silence the node, cut the transmitters, break the relay, and the rest collapses on its own like a roof losing its beam. After that salvo, the Ukrainian control map empties in a way that makes it hard to breathe. Drones are still in the air, but no longer receiving new commands. Those that climb in search of a signal only buy themselves a brief moment before being picked off by Pantsir and Tor. In less than 10 minutes from the moment the electronic switch is thrown, the corridor once considered safe is cleared. The sky changes hands, and on the Ukrainian side, only a cold status remains on the screen. No signal. When daylight fully arrives, what is revealed is not an air defense battle of good shooting, but a systematic strangulation carried out in the correct sequence. The drone crash strip stretches along the flight axis, showing that the swarm did not die at the forward line, but deep inside, exactly where the jamming pocket was placed. The densest cluster of fallen drones lies in the corridor segment where the formation lost synchronization, at the precise moment when the relay flickered and Ukrainian command and control was forced to transmit at higher power to save the link. The tactical build, therefore, does not lie in the number of drones lost, but in the rhythm stripped of command authority. More than 80 drones losing link in 3 to 4 minutes rendered Wave 2 meaningless before it even reached the door. Short-range air defenses like Pantsir S1 and Tor M2 were not fighting a swarm. They were simply clearing a strip of targets that had already lost the ability to coordinate. And once the emission source was boxed in, counter-battery fire of the BM-21 or Tornado G type did not need to destroy each vehicle, only to silence the node that held the rhythm. After this strike, Ukraine did not just lose drones. It lost control of rhythm within a window of under 10 minutes. And that is the hardest thing to replace in UAV warfare. This battle ends with a cold lesson about modern warfare. The swarm did not lose because it lacked numbers. It lost because the link was pulled below its tolerance threshold at exactly the right moment. When a system lives by data links and relays, the defender does not need to fire first, nor to open wide-area jamming. It only needs to place a jamming pocket at the correct distance, cut synchronization by clusters. At the tactical level, this turns the advantage of cheap and numerous into a deadly weakness, because quantity, once it loses rhythm, becomes density, and density makes everything easier to clear. At the operational level, it is a reminder that control of the electromagnetic spectrum is not an auxiliary task, but the steering wheel of the entire battle. In under 10 minutes, the sky can change hands without a single dogfight. This battle is not told by the wreckage of drones. It is told by the moment the link breaks.